Welcome to our fifth Outback conversation. Today's topic is education. As the rest of Australia learns to cope with an entire education system operating remotely, what can be learned from the Outback's existing approach? What has worked? What hasn't? And what were some compounding challenges in the bush? Today's presenter is Alana Moller, President of the Isolated Children's Parents Association.
Hi again, everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's session on, as you know, the impact of COVID-19 on Outback Australia across a range of key areas. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're all separately meeting today. In my case, that's the Jinnaburra people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. My name is Edwina. I work for the Pew Charitable Trusts in Queensland. And I'm facilitating the sessions. So today we're looking at education. I'm particularly actually excited about this one and to talk to Alana, who's joining us today. I'm the mother of one school age and one before school age child and work full time, and with COVID this year I got my first insight to homeschooling and trying to balance having both kids at home at different ages and stages and work and getting anything done. So I absolutely have a newfound respect for parents of children in regional remote Australia and across the Outback. So I'm really pleased to get this opportunity to chat with Alana Moller, who is the Federal President of the Isolated Children's Parents Association. So Alana has a passion for teaching and education and a lifetime understanding of life in the bush for both kids and parents. She has 3 daughters and is presenting to us today from her daughter's schoolroom, although they are on holidays, or the youngest one who's still at home and being homeschooled is on holidays. So the schoolroom is quiet today. We were to be joined by Michael Little from Desert Knowledge Australia, but he has had something urgent and unavoidable come up and can't be with us and sends his apologies. So I'm sorry about that, but just a reminder of the format of the sessions for anyone who hasn't joined us yet. Alana's going to do a bit of a talk and then we'll flick over to questions at the end. If you have a question during the presentation, just drop it in the chat function, and just remember to adjust the little tab at the bottom so that you're directing your question to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see and join in. And if you want to kick off the session by just introducing yourself and where you're from so that everyone who's here today can see the other names who've come along. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Alana now, and then we'll flick to questions after.
Thanks, Edwina, for having me and giving me the opportunity to participate, and thanks to Outback Alliance for the opportunity to participate and contribute today. So as mentioned in the introduction, I'm the Federal President of the Isolated Children's Parents Association, or ICPA for short. To give some background, ICPA works towards achieving equitable educational opportunities and outcomes for geographically isolated students who are faced with unique disadvantages when it comes to being educated. So my role here today is to comment on the experience of remote students and give an insight into the effects of COVID-19 on these children and their education. ICPA actually is it's a national body, but then we also have state councils as well. So there's state councils in separate states that work with their particular jurisdictions as well. So what we've seen during the COVID-19 pandemic is that many of the unique inequities and disadvantages associated with educating kids in remote educational environments at all times, not just during a pandemic, have been highlighted, reiterated and magnified. And these impacts were felt across all levels, from early childhood education right through to tertiary and training students and everything in between. Rural and remote early childhood and care involves unique challenges for remote families due to distance and isolation, remembering that in remote areas there is no access to any mainstream childcare or educators in many cases. Problems evolved out of the difficulties associated with the early childhood education and care relief package when it was applied to in-home care and family daycare in remote areas. In many circumstances during COVID-19, families in remote areas were left struggling to employ or retain educators, despite their needs remaining as they were before COVID-19 due to the nature of their livelihoods. ICPA heard from many families who found themselves in the dire situation of struggling to ensure that they had care for their children in remote locations while they continued their work. These problems highlighted the distinctive nature of remote childcare and education and the need for programs that are applied in these environments to consider the unique nature of the settings. Employment and retention of staff and resources is an ongoing difficulty in rural and remote schools also. In small rural schools with teaching principals, the additional responsibilities of setting up remote learning for their students added to their responsibilities, both from an administration perspective and as teachers. Furthermore, due to their isolation, we saw situations arise where remote schools struggled to access assistance to set up online teaching, especially if there are issues with their internet connections and other technical issues, as support and advice are not always easily or readily accessible in these areas. Also, for rural and remote schools and their students, access to any required equipment and resources can be a challenge at the best of times because they're not always, readily available in remote areas, and that's certainly the case, for families who had to teach their children at home all of a sudden. For geographically isolated distance education students, the disadvantages of remote learning are difficulties that they face at all times, not just through a crisis like COVID-19. So they're being taught at home all the time and have that remote learning happening all the time. The move to remote learning across Australia, I think, heightened the awareness of the need for a tutor or a supervisor available to assist and supervise students while participating in online learning or learning from home. There was a recognition that the children can't just do it on their own with their teacher in a remote environment. This is an ongoing commitment for remote distance education students and their families who must provide a tutor to supervise and assist their students at all times while juggling other responsibilities and obligations such as maintaining their businesses. Distance education could not succeed without a tutor in the home schoolroom supporting and managing the students' education. ICPA has been advocating for recognition of this fact and the tutor's role persistently. It's a major ongoing obligation for those families who must educate their children by remote learning at home at all times, and currently there's no specific support or assistance available for this. The tyranny of distance for geographically isolated distance education students means that many of these students have very limited face-to-face contact with their teachers and peers. COVID-19 has further limited these visits as schools have not been able to run face-to-face programs for students to attend, meaning that the rare opportunity for any face-to-face interaction, learning, participation in a regular classroom, assessments, identification of any specific learning needs and other activities have also been missed. As an example, students at one distance education school in Queensland have not had face-to-face contact with their teachers and peers since February, and no contact will resume until August at this stage. COVID-19 has also seen a delayed return to face-to-face schooling for many remote students who rely on boarding schools to receive an equitable education to that of their urban peers. These students have experienced prolonged challenges throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, and for many, these have been ongoing. Remote students who board interstate and even some students who faced local restrictions within their states were unable to return to their boarding schools when other students went back to face-to-face teaching, as state and at times local government boards continued to be closed. Furthermore, the implications of the Australian Health Protection Principal Committee guidelines for boarding schools has meant that many remote boarders remained unable to return to their school throughout the whole of Term 2, despite other students returning to face-to-face teaching and learning. Some parents made the difficult decision to move from their remote homes to reside in the town or city where their children attend school to allow them to return, while many other students have not been able to return to their school for 14 or more weeks, impacting not only the quality of their education, but also on their mental health and well-being, coping with prolonged isolation from their schools, teachers and peers. During the pandemic, there was a general feeling that face-to-face schooling is superior to remote or distance learning, and an ongoing intention to get students back to face-to-face learning as quickly as possible. However, for remote students who rely on boarding to be able to access face-to-face schooling, this has proven especially difficult. The awareness that arose during the pandemic restrictions of the impracticalities of remote learning also serves to highlight why remote families send their children to boarding school instead of keeping them at home, where they may only have access to distance education with no mainstream schools accessible for them in a geographically isolated setting. It is a matter of ensuring that these students have equitable educational opportunities to that of their urban peers, often not practical or possible in a remote learning environment as demonstrated in the COVID-19 restrictions. Extended periods of isolation compared to other students has also been an issue for remote tertiary students who had to return to their remote locations. Even as restrictions have eased in some areas and a sense of normality is slowly being restored, the ability to return to urban centres from remote areas remains a challenge. On the other side of the coin, many tertiary students have been unable to return home during this time. These students who must live away from home to access their courses and who do not receive youth allowance or any other financial support have faced difficulty affording their accommodation and other living expenses. This impact has also been felt by those young people living away from home to access traineeships or apprenticeships due to loss or decrease of income when their employment or training has been deferred, diminished or terminated temporarily or long term due to the pandemic. ICPA acknowledges that during the COVID-19 pandemic, some positive measures and initiatives put in place have benefited rural and remote students, recognising their unique needs, such as some of the rapid improvements to communications, especially around satellite internet access. Also, the government's support for students receiving youth allowance and the commitment to continue the assistance for isolated children allowance uninterrupted for geographically isolated recipients was gratefully received. The provisions made within the COVID-19 crisis to increase access to telehealth services covered by Medicare rebates has also been welcomed. One of the challenges for remote children with learning difficulties and the problems they face in a remote environment at any time is the ability to access professional support and assistance. Unfortunately, the increase to the Medicare rebate for telehealth still did not cater for the needs of all students and preschoolers in a remote and rural location. And that increase to telehealth services is not going to be long term at this point. But ICPA would like to see the increase to be extended and expanded so that it can be obtained for a range of allied health services for remote students who never, or at best rarely, have access to specialist support for their specific educational needs due to being geographically isolated. ICPA would be especially pleased to see initiatives seen during the COVID-19 continued and other assistance made available to address the many inequities faced when educating remote children. The challenges and inequities associated with educating children in the Outback will remain and be ongoing long after COVID-19, and perhaps the pandemic has given rise to a heightened awareness of some of these challenges. While not wanting to make light of what has been a difficult situation for so many, if something positive can come from what has transpired, perhaps it will be a new understanding of the ongoing inequities remote families face when educating their children and how essential it is that support be given to these students and their families to address these inequities. Thanks, Edwina.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alana. That was really insightful. I've got a couple of questions here that have come in while you've been talking, and I've written a whole bunch of them myself as well. So I'll start to work my way through those. You talked about the need to kind of have tutors, I guess, when you are, teaching kids from home. Do you think that that is going to be made harder now, just in terms of finding people who are able to travel to regional areas, particularly with many state borders still closed? Are there going to be additional challenges now in actually finding people who can work in schoolrooms in remote communities?
Edwina, it's been a long-term issue, the challenge of getting people to come to remote areas, even like before COVID, and certainly, it's not going to help situations with trying to get people to come and work in these areas. The other challenge is knowing how to, and it's a long-term challenge, not just through COVID, is when to get the people is actually having the place for them to stay and having the funds available to pay them and all those sorts of things. So certainly, it probably has lessened the pool of people to come. That wasn't a huge, great number of people in the first place anyway.
Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming, obviously, if you can't find a tutor, then a lot of the responsibilities of learning fall back on mum, who's probably trying to do a whole lot of other things as well. What are the kind of ongoing impacts that you see? And I'm thinking, even just mental health on and it would be largely women, I'm assuming, who would sort of take up the role as kind of home tutor if an outside tutor wasn't available. Is that a problem? Is that, an issue for women, a mental health issue, to be sort of thrust into this role of being, in a classroom with your kids all day while also trying to juggle all the other responsibilities they must have?
Yep, so in ICPA research, it's definitely the majority of home tutors are the mother. Simply, you know, that a lot of that comes back to the situation of being able to afford to have somebody to assist you. Whether you can afford to have someone, they've got to have accommodation available for them. There's so many more issues in a remote environment. You know, they can't live in town and come out each day, because that's why you're doing homeschooling or doing distance ed, because you haven't got that access. So in our research and from our, you know, anecdotal evidence or what we know, you know, it's definitely the majority of home tutors are the mother or a member of the family. And certainly the impact on those on that person who has to be in the homeschool room with the students all the time, the ramifications are huge. You know, there's the inability to be able to participate in the workforce, or a limited ability to participate in the workforce. There's those mental health issues of isolation, being isolated. And one of my catchphrases that I use is, you know, isolated shouldn't mean alone, but it's really easy to feel like you're alone when you're sitting in a schoolroom by yourself with your kids. And that's not to say, you know, it's a real pleasure getting to spend that time with your children and have that relationship with your children, but it certainly is a challenge when you haven't got that support around you. And something that's really important to understand is that in geographically isolated distance education, often it's not necessarily just the mum, it's the whole family has to be supportive and has to be a part of it. You know, so dad might take the kids to do their measuring out in the paddock, or they might learn to count by counting cows through the yards or sheep through the dip, or, you know, those sorts of things. So it actually becomes a whole family situation, and everything you do within your family and within your business sort of focuses around education, because, you know, okay, we can't muster today because the child's got a specific assessment task that they need to do. So that means you set out your business and you set out your work to fit in with school, because it's such a big part of your life.
There's a question that's come in here, and I'm just going to read it word for word. Could you explain a bit more that at the start of COVID-19 things became more difficult? I would have assumed that arrangements in place would have worked better in Outback Australia than, you know, in standard schools where we've, you know, clearly just not used to online learning. So what were the sort of specific challenges when the virus broke out for learning in Outback communities?
Yeah, so one thing that we saw and certainly, you know, for people who'd been doing distance ed in terms of all the time in that situation, yes, certainly. And we had the opportunity, and ICPA had the opportunity to put forward, you know, advice for people of how to cope with it and those sorts of things. One thing we did see arise is that, particularly in some state systems, the platform that was used for the mainstream children to start doing online learning was the same one that the distance education families rely on all the time. And in some situations it was overrun, like it, you know, and stopped working for everybody. So that impact happened in regular homeschool rooms where normally you do have access, but we lost access as well because of that situation. In terms of the like in-home care and those things that I talked about in terms of the impacts of that, what we found was that there was a real misunderstanding and confusion around the new funding arrangements, and there was troubles applying that into the in-home care situations with remote families where nothing changed for them. So, you know, the new package was for childcare where kids had been pulled out of childcare and those sorts of things. Whereas if you're in a remote environment and you've got 3 children and you've got an educator or a carer for them because you're out in the paddock helping your husband, that didn't change in the COVID situation. Does that make sense? Yeah,
that does. And I guess it kind of leads into whether there are any kind of more silver linings here, you know, like obviously we're talking and kind of examining how, you know, maybe work might become easier potentially to access in regional communities, because suddenly we've made this shift where everyone's kind of more at ease with using online tools for better or worse. So, you know, potentially that may open up opportunities there. Do you think there may be more opportunities made available for, you know, kids learning in remote places to sort of access learning or resources that might not have been there before the pandemic?
I can only hope. And for myself personally, you know, to see the amount of resources that were shown and made available throughout COVID, that you know, in 10, 11 years of teaching my children, I'd never had access to. It was amazing. So yeah, certainly and I speak for all home tutors and distance education families. If we can have more access to resources that will help us as much as they've helped everybody else, we would certainly be happy with that. The only thing, and in terms of you know, giving advice to people when this whole situation was starting, when you are doing homeschooling or doing distance ed all the time, and you have to be there all the time, you know, there's certain things you have to get done. So it's just like them being in a regular schoolroom, and they have to do assignments, they have to get assessment done. And so the challenge with all these extra resources that are fabulous, that would be great, is that sometimes it's hard to fit those into what we have to get done. So although there's advantages to that, it's not always going to be practical for us to apply it in our situations.
There's a couple of sort of slightly separate questions here that I'm going to kind of paraphrase and merge together, but you touched on when you were talking earlier that, you know, you had ended up sort of providing some advice in terms of sort of moving to online learning. Did you find that your voice as an organisation was amplified to government during the pandemic?
We did find that we were able to put quite a bit across in lots of different aspects. We were given the opportunity to put forward our experiences particularly in media and in things such as webinars and those sorts of things. We certainly did find that there was a connection with some governments and with some situations that we were able to put the problems forward that our families had, and then many of them were addressed, particularly in terms of communications. As I mentioned, some of the communications improvements, particularly in satellite internet connections and those sorts of things, were for rural and remote families were very helpful. Then in other situations, although we were trying really hard, and different state councils in particular were trying really hard, particularly like with the boarding situation, trying really hard to get the message out there of how hard that was for our kids. It did take some time to get the message across, and it still remains to be seen what will happen in term 3 with those kids.
I know, just, you know, being on the Sunshine Coast, which is, you know, a stone's throw from the big city, but still our internet here is, you know, particularly at my house, it's just appalling. So I guess I'm interested in, you know, for you, how much remote education is kind of limited by that access to high-speed internet, and whether the virus, I mean, you touched on before that, you know, it was harder to get onto those Education Queensland websites and things because they were overloaded, but the technology itself, was that, you know, kind of better or worse during COVID? Did you notice any difference?
I'll have to admit that for us, with our satellite connection that we have all the time, it remained the same, I guess, and then other initiatives were put forward. So, you know, we were given extra data, and there was some new programs put forward from our providers and from the NBN, and from, as we know, Telstra gave extra data to people and all those sorts of things. So in terms of that, there was quite a lot of support and assistance made available, and even increased over the time.
Okay. We've got another question here from Barry from Pew. There was an attempt a few years ago in WA to kill the School of the Air. ICPA at the time did some campaigning on it and stopped it. Is there any hint that state governments might try on such a thing again?
I'm just commenting from a federal level. We have policy that we definitely would not like to see that happen. Ultimately, it's a state government decision, but all of our state ICPAs certainly would not like to see that happen, and we haven't heard of any of that happening at this point in time, but we will definitely continue putting that forward and making it known that that School of the Air and Distance Education for geographically isolated families needs to be available within their regions and rural areas.
Okay, and I've got a question here from John, who is asking if there were more local secondary options available in remote communities. Do you think that would influence parents' choices to send kids to boarding school?
I think it's dependent upon location, where they're located, you know. So certainly if they were available in closer range for people, they may certainly consider it. It's hard to know because they're not available at the moment, you know. And when you live an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever, from the nearest school, it's just not practical to attend those schools on a day-to-day basis, and it doesn't. And it's, you know. And I think it was recognised within COVID, it's more than just the curriculum that's important. So, you know, that in distance education, you get given, you know, the curriculum's there, you can teach it at home, that can happen, but there's so much more to it than just that. And so even, you know, if a school is, you know, a number of hours away and you're travelling backwards and forth, that's not necessarily ideal for students because they're still not getting the opportunity to participate in other things that might be available within the school environment if they were closer. But it would remain to be seen. It depends, you know, where for distance and those sorts of things.
Okay. Look, I'm conscious that we're just nearly at time. So I'm going to ask you one final question, which is, if there's one thing, you know, the message you could take from this period, you know, take to government something you'd like a permanent change to kind of come from it that would benefit your family and many other families like yours out there for the future, what would that be?
I think the biggest thing that I'd like to put forward is to remember that we don't have choices. And when we're in a geographically isolated situation, we don't have a choice of it, and we don't do things because we want to or choose to. We do things because we have to in our situations. You know, if we haven't got schools available, we have to send our children to a school that's away from their home. If we only have a small rural and remote school nearby that doesn't have the resources available and those sorts of things, then, you know, we have to look at other options for ourselves because we don't have any other choice in our situation.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Alana, for joining us today. I've really appreciated it, you know, because as I said at the start, you know, I have a newfound appreciation for how incredibly tough it can be to juggle, you know, having kids at home. I can't even imagine having them at boarding school. I imagine that's a whole other set of struggles there as well. So yeah, I've really enjoyed chatting with you today. And I will, just before we sign off, say that we have on Thursday the 2nd, we're talking about economic recovery. So I think that's going to be another really interesting session. We'll be looking at what's needed for remote regional economic development after COVID-19. So please join us on Thursday at the same time if you can. And yeah, thank you again, Alana, for taking time out of what must be a very busy schedule to join us here today.
No problem. Thanks very much, Edwina. Thanks, everybody.